down, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Legends Combiners are an interesting thing. They're sort of a microcosm of engineering philosophies, where you can essentially see the evolution in real time. In a mere 10 years, we've basically gone from this to this, for better or for worse. It's interesting to see the evolution of the subculture within a subculture within a subculture within a subculture. Third-party Legends Combiners are a hyper-specific kind of product, and seeing them grow and change over all these years is something else. Question is, with how far we've come, is there any worth in going back to the old? Should we even bother with what came before when it's got enough jank to make Dorico blush? Iron Factory is, without a doubt, the pioneer of the niche. Without them, third-party Legends wouldn't be what it is today, but with their earlier stuff, it can definitely be hit or miss. I suppose that casts a shadow of doubt over today's topic. Sure, it is a landmark release, but does it go toe-to-toe with the rest of the niche? Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and welcome back to another Second Opinion. With how often I've skipped the legendary marathon due to external circumstances, this one's been a long time coming. This figure finally brings us back to what's considered the real start of third-party Legends Combiners. Hulky came before, but behind today's diagnosis lies the real genesis, where it truly flourished. Iron Factory EX22 to 24, the Combaticons and their combined mode, War Giant, or Bruticus for normal folks. Third-party Legends Combiners were always an inevitability. I mean, you start a lineup of figures in a scale that's doing well, and at that point, why not do Combiners? Iron Factory was smart though. They didn't just go for it right off the bat. They went through many releases before they built up their skill set. And it's a good thing too, because this set actually marks a significant first for them. See, when you take a look at a lot of the earlier Iron Factory releases, they sort of relied on the Cybertronian alternate modes as a crutch. It's not all of them. Ultra Magnus and Overlord come to mind as notable exceptions. And who could get mad at Windblade, but a good chunk of earlier releases felt a little bit lazy on the vehicle side of things. It's for this reason many preferred DX9 as a company. And although I didn't fit into this category as DX9 exhibited a bunch of its own issues, I can see why people would feel this way. Regardless, a change needed to be made. I'm not quite sure if these were the first Iron Factory figures to really place vehicle modes in the forefront, but they were the most prominent in the starting lineup. There's still a lot of jank on show, but you can see this is where the big shift happened early on in their lineup. In essence, they've gone from making things to making boxes, for better or for worse. And that's sort of where Brawl fits into, the middle ground between better and worse. Of course, he's categorically a better figure than many of the Iron Factory alt modes that came before, but as a tank in his own right, he's a little janky. The shaping is mostly there, but it's ever so slightly off in a few areas. In essence, it's a turret on a rectangle, which on a base level I guess is what a tank is supposed to be, but the proportions are pretty jank. The tank is really wide, while the turret is kinda short and flat. If they'd balanced out the two, making one smaller and the other bigger, it could have been a lot more effective, especially since thinner legs would improve the combined mode overall. But as it stands, it's not bad, just a smidge weird. At least it's solid enough, everything is pretty dense and sturdy, a far cry from their earlier attempts. And at least the turret rotates, something not guaranteed on other Legends tank formers at the time. Though it's a bit weird with its double rotation. It was always a point of contention I've had, even upon first getting it. But hey, at least it's better than Combiner Wars. Who thought this was acceptable, even back then? The G1 original did it fine, what's your excuse? I guess my take on this fella is that he's decent for the time, but he hasn't aged the most gracefully. There's gaps in Iron Factory's skill set, and in some of the panel work, literal gaps where you can literally see through the alt mode. Even the mechanical detail teeters on the edge of third-party syndrome. Aimless and just there for the sake of being there. It could use a lot more paint. There's not a lot of color breakup, and even though there aren't many places paint could probably go, I would have liked to have seen them work around that and bring what sculpting he does have to life. Thing is, I could go on and on about all the funk in the junk trunk, but the more I harp on, the worse this alt mode actually seems. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, even by today's standards. It's functional, it serves a purpose. And although it doesn't go above and beyond like some modern examples, it still serves its purpose well. It's probably my least favorite of the set, even though it's far from the worst, but that's only because it's adequate. And hey, at least it's not cast in defecation colored plastic like the Combiner Wars version. Now as for release strategies, each set was included in 2 packs retailing for $100 each. Kinda puts into perspective how far third-party engineering and pricing has come, considering these 2 sets essentially cost the same. And packed in with Brawl is everyone's favorite cryptocurrency enthusiast, channeling the vibes of Transformers animated to the absolute nines. This style of alternate mode was very popular for Swindle in the early years of third party, and this is a wonderful take on the concept for the small scale paradigm. You've basically got a giant box on the back with a sloped section at the front. Think a more aerodynamic version of Legacy Crankcase, complete with the engineering jank towards the back, but we don't mind given the age and size of the figure. I'm actually surprised how much I like the blue windows. Usually this baby blue is a massive turnoff for me, because I always just wish they could have made it opaque instead. But here, no, I think it works very well. Likely because it's a bit darker and less pastel than most offerings we get. That's probably what's doing it for me. That, or it's so small it's less egregious. The bumper section is done really well too. Low to the ground, but still incredibly angular. It balances gunmetal paint and black plastic very well. So well, I completely forgot my copy was missing a headlight until I went back and watched the original video to check up on what I said last time. All these years and I still haven't fixed it. Whoops. The sides are fairly panelly, but even age and size aside, I think they work with the silhouette quite well. Sure, newer figures do this sort of thing better, but all the details still come through reasonably well. They incorporate the hinges into the existing line work in some really clever ways, and it kinda makes me wish they'd done something similar with Brawl. These two literally released together after all. I really like how they added extra paint to the wheels, and even pinned them for extra rolling action. It's nothing crazy, but it's nice to see them go the extra mile. The back section is also done exceptionally with this extra paint, something many figures to this day still miss. I also never realized, until I was making this video now, that the feet rotate around to make the roof taper off. That's a really nice trick, and it helps me appreciate this mode a lot better now. I know this alt mode has its issues, but I can't help but love this thing to bits. Maybe I'm a lot more forgiving because a lot of my attention is drawn to the roll bar on the roof, though in my defense, it is a really nice roll bar. I used to be a lot more critical of this piece because it has to parts form between modes, and as far as I can tell, there's no place for it in the other modes. But the alt mode still looks fine without it. Maybe not as resplendent, but not as bad as, say, G.I. Joe Megatron having an entire panel missing from his back. These days, my main gripes are the annoyances with the weapon storage. The smaller gun fits on fine, but the bazooka never really seems to work properly. It always sits in an angle thanks to these tabs on the top, which are there for the somewhat useless bust mode I'll show off later. And when you use the dedicated 5mm port on the back, it works a lot better and even sits with the silhouette a lot nicer, but I'm not sure if this was ever intentional. These tabs work, but it's not as snug a fit as I'd like. Still, boo who, the weapon storage isn't great. If that's the only thing wrong with this mode, it's doing pretty well. At least it's actually well proportioned, unlike Magic Square's dinky ass thing. And at least they included it at all. It's so iconic to the G1 toy, more so than the nothing Missile Mirage had. Stay mad, Siege Mirage defenders, stay mad. And with that, the first 2-pack is done. Following that, I'm not actually sure which of these released next. I know the numbering, but Iron Factory has an annoying tendency to release things out of order. Just look at the recent Lio Kaiser. Hurry up and finish Lio Kaiser, please. I'm trying desperately to hold my sanity together. Regardless, I'ma just do it in whichever order feels most comfortable to me, which gives us the arms next. Blastoff feels very octagonal in his shuttle mode. There are a lot of unconventional shapes being used around the place. He almost looks like one of those early AKOs that took from a billion different sources and Ship of Theseus themselves into basically new figures. This is, of course, done to a much better standard, though nowhere near on the level of the Magic Square version, but still a really nice shuttle mode. He probably has some of the best color breakup of the set, especially with the transparent and opaque purples peeking through on the various parts of the chassis. Seriously, those windows, they're something else. This is like the one thing that was missing on the Magic Square outing. I also really like the way the fists break up the nose cone a bit. It's a really cool way to make double use of existing sprues. The middle section is a bit messy and a bit undercooked, but the wingspan and engine module are gorgeous. They don't use that many paint tabs, just a bit of gunmetal and purple here and there, but it really brings it to life. The thrusters at the back are gorgeous, not as cool as Magic Square again, but still very nice. I also find the way the feet work really clever, adding some rather nice detail and allowing the dedicated landing gear to function without actually dedicated pieces. And, contrary to belief of my 2018 self, they don't interfere with the weapon storage, which is good because, word of advice, don't lose these guns! Don't do it! You'll regret it later! And I'll explain why in the combined modes. All in all, it's a pretty good Cybertronian-ish, science fiction-ish space shuttle. I'm not going to pretend it's my favorite Legend scale shuttle, Blastoff or otherwise, but it pulls it off reasonably well, at least better than the Takara/Power the Prize Blastoff that came out a little bit prior. And hey, it's better than whatever the Vortex was trying to do. Seriously, what am I looking at? I can kinda get the vibe they were going for, sort of a helicopter version of the Space Marine Storm Talon gunship. That or it's some IDW design I don't know of. I'm sorry, the comic run is very long and I'm terrified of the commitment. I can see what they were going for, but this definitely feels the most undercooked. The front tries to give the illusion of a sleek and slender cockpit, but the thick thighs don't save lives in this instance. They ruin the aerodynamicism and cause an aircraft crash. And the crazy thing is, this whole thing is a parts forming piece. Annoyance with parts forming brainstorming aside, they could have literally made this anything they wanted. Why do they have to make this so small? And another thing, why do the blades fold up and unpeg so easily? It keeps setting such an annoying precedent with Bruticus. Stop it! But the worst part would easily have to be the arms. They're just not doing anything. They could have done something really cool like fold into the back of the tail fin, ironically what the Magic Square version sort of did, but no, instead they just had to lazily chill out on the side. I guess it's nice that the guns can stay pegged in and don't need to be removed during transformation, but these still should have been done better. And yes, you can use the combine mode pegs to move them back. And in some ways, this is a little better. In other ways, this is way worse, but hey, at least there's an option for you. The engineering here is the worst factors of their Cybertronian laziness brought to the forefront. And honestly, I can't even be mad. It's not infuriating, it's just so funny with how brazen it is. It's this hilarity that places it above the banality of Brawl for me. But even so, I still can't forgive it. There's certain concessions you can give to older figures, and then there's this, and this is this. This is unacceptable, not in an angry way, but just in a categorical way. Sometimes you have to put aside personal feelings and acknowledge cold facts, like Reactivate never coming out, and Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Weirdly enough, the last one gets people the most riled up. But hey, with that out of the way, at least we have the crown jewel of the set, Onslaught. Hypothetically too big to be packaged with anyone else, he brings the beef in all aspects. I say hypothetically because he was supposed to be packaged with Combiner Hunter RC for the first run. And he was, that's not the dumb part. It's that there was never a second run. This isn't New Age, Iron Factory doesn't reissue things later down the line. Aside from one instance of the Decepticon Justice Division, and even then it was in completely different colors. As such, pretty much every release came with Combiner Hunter RC. So, what was the point? Anyway, if you want a rundown of her, I've just released a review on her 2 days ago. Either way, this is a lovely Onslaught. I've always been more of a fan of the long-nosed versions of the character, but this is still a lovely rendition. It sort of reminds me of Classics Octane, only much more cuboid. Onslaught is a truck comprised mostly of rectangles, but unlike Brawl, he isn't ridiculously wide, and he has the mechanical detail to back it up. This time, it's all crisp and purposeful. It's mostly utilitarian, but it pulls back enough so it still fits into the IDW stylings. If I had to find a vibe comparison, weirdly it reminds me of the old Lego Dino Attack sets. Not sure why, but it just does. The front is very mean, squinting the windows and keeping everything very low to the ground. It's sort of Cybertron Mudflap-esque minus the green highlights. I really like the way it incorporates the hinges into the design itself. They don't feel unsightly or like they shouldn't be there. They blend seamlessly in a very similar manner to Swindle. In general, I think Swindle and Onslaught are the vehicle triumphs of this set. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the robot feet, which just sort of stick out the bottom. But it's not something you tend to notice unless you're really looking for things to complain about. The back section is pretty clean too and incorporates the combined cannon into everything really well. It's sadly not fully integrated like the more recent outing, but it's a really good use of combiner mass for the time, and it blends super well. I only really have one genuine complaint. The arms unfortunately don't do as much as they should. There's no tabs keeping them in position, and instead of bringing up the dedicated cannon hinges, often the rotation defaults to the elbows, revealing the fists underneath. Can't say I'm a fan, it's the only part of this mode I find unfinished. Aside from that, it's really just nitpicks, like the window shade blending in with the plastic a bit. Weirdly enough, the baby blue from Swindle would have done a lot better, but honestly, it's minor. And like, maybe the bigger guns drown out the smaller ones, but honestly, who cares? This is a fantastic vehicle mode that leads the pack as it should. It well earns its keep as a combiner torso figure, at least as far as the vehicle mode is concerned, and makes a striking display piece in any Legends collection. Also, once again, really fun to roll around due to pinned wheels. Whee! But what about vehicle mode accessories? I mean, he's the torso bot, and as such, he comes with all the extra parts for the combiner. Surely they have to do something, right? Well, Iron Factory has kept this pretty simple, allowing everything to combine into a trailer. It's not exactly the cleanest, but I've seen way worse integration for combiner bits. Plus, this is a pretty old figure, so I can definitely cut it some slack. You do have to deal with the fist cavity pieces being out of place, and the cohesion isn't quite there, but it serves a very nice function of carrying the other robots around. Unlike the Magic Square version, any 4 will fit, and it's incredibly fun. Blastoff especially, he just works in this context. Honestly, I find myself way more invested in the vehicle carrying functionality of Onslaught than I do with Ultra Magnus. Blasphemy, I know! It's not an absolutely required feature, but it is very nice to see, and for me stands high above the base mode Magic Square gave us. I really like the simplicity of this functionality. It's not the best execution-wise, as it has issues with random bits and joints sticking out, but it's just a nice way to bring the Menasor style over to Onslaught. Make no mistake, I fully expect Age of the Prime's Onslaught to pull the same when it drops late this year or sometime the next, and I for one am incredibly excited for it. With that said, when bringing them all together, I'm not sure I feel much. With most combiner sets, you line them up and something special grows within your heart. It's hard to explain, but there's sort of a carnal instinct that compels you to put all the combiner vehicles together, and with these, I don't particularly feel much. Granted, with some sets I feel far less, such as the Combiner Wars Constructicons, but these, something feels missing. Maybe it's how some of of them feel a bit wonky, or maybe it's because they're not all the same style, with some jagged and some boxy, some armly. I do think I can cut them some slack though. This was basically one of their first attempts at doing a vehicle first lineup. Even with a bunch of older releases that did do vehicle modes well, you could tell they started with robot modes and worked backwards. People often talk about growing pains with certain toy lines, and these are most definitely growing pain toys. It's a decent set in vehicle mode, just this isn't the best functionality you'll find here. Now, the engineering on show is a little bit old and a little bit clunky, but it's far from the worst Iron Factory has done. There are bits and pieces here and certain members that really don't hold up to modern snuff, but they're still pretty damn good for the time, certainly better than anything DX9 was doing at the time. I do think Brawl's the weakest of the bunch though in terms of engineering. There are parts forming issues with the other members, but Brawl is the one that I find the most difficult to convert. First thing you want to do is untab these tread pieces from the bottom, and they just sit there. Unfortunately, no tabs locking them in place, they just do what they do. The feet also come around the back, we'll just deal with those later. You bring these panels at the front all the way down, then you kind of have to finagle a lot of this out, but it's really annoying. That will allow you to finagle the arms out like so. With the extra space, you can untab them from the torso and bring them out. It's easier to get the legs pulled out when they're separated. Now, the legs are an absolute nightmare to get out. It's really difficult to do. You want to somehow push it inwards so that then it also comes out. It's a bit hard to explain, but once you get it out there, like push inwards and upwards, and then eventually it somehow finagles itself loose. It's not something I can really explain, it's just a really awful way that they work. I've just never liked the way that Iron Factory does their leg transformations. They're always a little bit iffy. I refer to as the Iron Factory pull-out method, but this isn't really that. This is more so, hey, f you, the legs aren't coming out until eventually they somehow are. There had to be a better way to do this. This is my least favorite part of the transformation, even with all the parts forming. But after that, you rotate the waist, keep the head up, but bring down the torso piece like so. Forearms will rotate downwards, and these sections should now rotate to the sides like that. You gotta get these ankles out, which are a bit difficult, but eventually they come out, giving him some reasonable foot support, and the feet rotate around 180 degrees. Finishing up Brawl, and yeah, I really don't like transforming this one. The less I have to do it, the better. Swindle's fortunately a lot more fun, though he does start with parts forming the entire roll bar section on the roof, which is stuck in there really tightly, like goddamn. But everything after that is a lot nicer. You bring these panels down to the side like so, bring these panels into the feet like so, the legs disconnect and rotate downwards like that, feet move a little bit up, rotate the toes around into place. Come on, don't rotate the ankle, just the toes. And then the feet will move into place and you can separate the legs and you're good. The front of the truck rotates upwards, but it rotates upwards separately so that it sits flush against the back there. You can then sort of bring the arms out of the way, allowing you to push the backpack into there. The arms will then disconnect and rotate outwards on the shoulders, on their doppel hinges. Then the head cavity pops up, the head itself pops up, goes into place, and you rotate it in place, and you're good. Nice little fun Swindle. Simple but effective, just like most of the older Iron Factory releases, and a lot of their newer ones too. Now, blast off, you have to be very careful in two specific instances. One is the guns. When you remove them, do not lose them. These are mandatory for the combined mode. If you lose them, you're basically fucked. The arm will just flop around and it won't work. So once you've got them in a container elsewhere, first thing you want to do is bring these panels down. They will fold against the shuttle wings and rotate backwards. The feet will come down, rotate around into place, like so, and then you separate them and you bring these panels out. Come on, get out of there. I don't know why this one's unreasonably tight. That's weird. And then you want to make sure you hold onto the waist while you pull this. It's the other part that's very careful. I'll get into why in the robot section, but there are some severe build quality issues in the torso itself, so it's very important to be careful when you do it this way. Anyway, you then collapse it, and fortunately this will solidify everything. You fold up the landing gear, and interestingly, the roof sort of follows the G1 transformation scheme, aside from the fact that the cockpit, the window section, folds onto the back. But the arms are basically G1 with the way they're formed from the front of the cockpit, right down to the fists rotating into place like that. Of course, G1 didn't have the resplendent shoulder pads, but those unpeg and you should be fine. And then last but not least, you pull up the head and it should lock into place there. Unfortunately, the tab that made it a bit easier snapped off. Of all the build's quality issues, it wasn't the waist that constantly breaks the brokes for me. It was that little bit there. Oh, the irony. And then we move to Vortex, where you have to move off the entire front of the cockpit. Yeah, parts forming and it's really not good. It's very unfortunate. But whatever. Basically, you bring the arms out, you untab them, you bring them out, and you rotate the guns into place as you do. It is nice that they stay on during transformation. I wish the Magic Square had something similar for that. You can move these up and out of the way to make the rest easier. Open up the leg cavities, untab that from the roof, and separate the legs, otherwise the rest won't work because you've got to bring these out, and the legs have to be separated to do that. Close up the leg cavities, and you bring the feet into place. Unfortunately, you do have to remove this as well for this to fully sit on the backpack. It's a shame they couldn't just have it fold into the backpack. It's a bit of a missed opportunity there. Oh, and this has started to fall off as well. And what's that? Is that stress marks as well? God, what is with the build quality on this thing? That's not good at all. But still, it's an okay transformation, even in spite of the parts forming. Could be a lot better, though. And if you want to have it sit more flush, that also sits further there. But that can stop some of the articulation, so I tend not to do it. And finally, the big boy, probably the most fun of the set. You want to remove the top section like that. This parts forming I understand more than anything else, just because of the way it all works. These two panels rotate outwards there, essentially unlocking everything. The legs will separate. They have sort of a double hinge that they come out on that's also ratcheted. This is the Iron Factory pull-out method that I don't like. There's no real way to lock them solidly in place. They have ratchets, but it could definitely be a lot better. Anyway, feet pop out. These sections rotate downwards so that you get full access to the knees. These sections rotate out a little bit so that you get proper ankle supports, but not all the way because they're mostly for combined mode. Separate the arms, bring them down like so. Separate the forearms. They're not really pegged in, unfortunately, as I mentioned in the vehicle mode, but they do look all right. Separate these sections from these, which will allow more articulation and a bit more flair. And last but not least, you open up the head, bring it up, and that will also lock that into place there. It'll sit there and remain nice and solid. Not bad. Not bad at all. So yeah, the transformations aren't the best, but they're far from the worst either. I've seen far worse transformations in Iron Factory, and even in the marathon that I've been doing recently, there have been way worse ones I've covered. Way worse Bruticus transformations I've covered as well. And these are kind of charming. Dated, yes, but still pretty charming. I'm not going to pretend this is the best Bruticus conversion ever. I mean, I don't think we've really reached that point with any Bruticus on the market, at least when it comes to Legend scale, but they're fun. And if the build quality issues weren't there, they would be even more fun. They got problems, but they're okay. Even amidst their efforts to try and do better in the vehicle mode cohesion, you can tell right off the bat, the robots are far more of a focus here. Aside from the combination, of course. It's been something that's affected their design philosophy throughout their tenure. Even when the alt modes are wonderful in their own right, you can tell the robot modes are the main draw. As such, this loadout does a lot better, not just in overall quality, but also in cohesion. This feels much more like a team. They just work together a lot better than the vehicles did. Even the worst member takes a massive step up. Although Brawl is the jankiest, he's doing a lot better in this mode. He's a nice balance between the lankiness of the Toon model and the beef of the original toy, with a reasonably slender inner frame and a ton of armor around everything else. The head sculpt is decent, but it's sometimes difficult to see with how sunken in the torso is. Usually this would be a fault, but I think this actually really works with the design. It makes the shoulder line seem a lot higher and the torso armor a lot beefier. This monolithic breastplate carries all of the intensity of the G1 toy, without sticking so far out that it gives the impression he's been macro-dosing progesterone. The purple midriff is absolutely gorgeous, echoing elements of IDW Megatron, but making it all its own. I actually kind of wish there was more of this purple elsewhere along the body, but it still makes a great semi-salient feature. The shoulders are massive towers more resplendent than the center points, though ever since they put that awful Westfield logo on it, that hasn't been too hard a bar to jump. I love the way the treads drape to the side, creating this really cool triangular look. Sort of looks like how Brawl would appear if he existed in the Alliance continuity, in proper form and not some bigoted fan film. Unfortunately, these two present my biggest gripe with the toy, the tolerances. On release they were fine, but nowadays they've become looser than insurance's definition on a valid claim. This is because they're using hard plastics on both parts of the ball joint, when usually the socket needs to be cast in a softer material. It's been a constant issue with older Iron Factory figures. Thankfully it seems fixed these days, but it is something to be aware of when back collecting. And if we're talking biggest issues outside of build quality, the legs don't particularly work that well. From the front, they're way too wide, and from the back, they're simultaneously too kibbly and too hollow. And considering the difficulty in getting here, I don't think this was worth it. It's far from the worst leg transformation. I mean, the previously reviewed Magic Square Brawl and DX9 Double Dealer releases spring to mind, but you can tell this is where Iron Factory's changing in engineering philosophy caused some issues. The backpack also looks like a turtle shell. That's not a criticism, it's just funny. Accessory-wise, it comes with two pretty simple guns, kinda teetering on the edge of Uzis, I think. They're nice, albeit not quite in the style of Brawl. You'd think he'd get something bigger to go with his beefcake proportions. I do like the intent of having the handles flip out on the side to be held by both hands. Unfortunately, the actual result doesn't work as he can't move his arms past his memories, but it's a cool intent at least. Kinda moot when he has two anyway though, but that's due to to the combination, so it's fine. At least he comes with 2 decent accessories in the first place though, unlike the Combiner Wars version. Though at this point, with Age of the Primes on the horizon, I'm not sure potshots are that old piece of shit really that relevant. Everything Iron Factory does is better. It's not that hard, but it is a smidge funny to mention. Brawl is a pretty simple fella, and even though he's a little wibbly and kibbly, he's quite the looker. While Magic Square is definitely more solid, Iron Factory is easier on the eyes. He poses pretty well, bad tolerances aside. The amount here actually holds up quite well today. Sure, there's no extreme additions like ab crunches or butterfly joints, but everything you could want is here. He's also really tall for a figure of his size and proportions. Not absurdly so like the new age Dinobots. God, these basically aren't even Legends figures anymore. But he has a certain presence to him, though maybe that's because his pack mate is a short king. When Swindle was first announced, the height difference was one of the biggest talking points. It was unheard of. Combiner members who have canonical height disparity, but they still combine into the same length of limb? How is that possible? What is Iron Factory cooking? Turns out the answer was a lot simpler than anticipated. Most of the height just went to his backpack. Yeah, he's definitely got some jank in his trank, and it does not blend with the rest of the design. It sits really low and juts out to a ridiculous degree, but as it's in service of a gimmick, I kinda like how brazen it is. It's the textbook definition of intrusive, but it's humorous, so honestly I don't mind. And the rest of the design more than makes up for it, because this is one stylish adventure capitalist. Head sculpt is right on the money, with the perfect Scramble City helmeted noggin draped in a dastardly shit-eating grin. See, Magic Square? This is how you do a swindle! The paint is subtle but super effective, which is really good as some swindles can tend to fuck up the whole thing by making everything too dark. The torso that sits below is wonderfully chunky, going more toyetic in its stylings with a faux Scramble City peg right in the middle. I love how the vents adorn the protruding pecs. It's a perfect match of sculpt and paint. Those vents continue subtly to the shoulders too, as a nice bit of almost unnoticeable visual cohesion. The arms themselves aren't that heavily sculpted, but they make up for it by doing this really cool thing with the kibble. By leaning into the arm kibble stylings, they end up feeling way thinner than they actually are, moving a lot of this center of balance downwards from a visual perspective. It's really clever, and I wish more figures would play around with arm kibble. We've been missing these sorts of things ever since the Prime Wars trilogy began, and it's a real shame. The legs are also fantastic, bulky as shit with a healthy dose of gunmetal. They're practically squares from the front, and with the boxy torso they create some wonderful synergy. They're also really well articulated with the extra foot hinges, brought about from the transformation. In fact, this guy poses remarkably well for the size. It's honestly surprising. You would have thought he'd be a brick of a thing given all the kibble on show. But not only does he move, but he retains the expressiveness in spite of his vehicle bits. From the outset, Swindle feels like he shouldn't work. Beyond the size difference, the way he converts doesn't really lend himself to a dynamic robot design. And yet, the kibble works, and he works. I mean, he at least works a hell of a lot better than the Magic Square version. The conversion's so nightmarish that it makes Danny DeVito freak the fuck out. Honestly, I barely have anything to complain about with this fellow. Sure, the backs of the legs are hollow, but that contributes to the excellent articulation, so who cares? The one thing I kinda take issue with is that the roll bar accessory doesn't do anything in robot mode. Functionality in this particular mode would have really sealed the deal, but as it stands, it's just sort of there, doing nothing. Real shame. At least the remaining accessories work well. The pea shooter is cool, I guess, and the bazooka is really nice, though it can look a bit weird over the top given how small it is. Still bigger than Magic Square though. What the f were they even thinking? I prefer to undersling it, like most of the promotional photography shows off. I am glad they included it though. It's something so iconic to the character, and other more G1 versions missing out is always disappointing to me. It's a nice feature that adds a good amount of value to the pack, and as a 2-pack, these two are very much worth the money. Aftermarket prices? I can't say, but on release they were easily worth the hundreds. Swindle is definitely the standout of the set though. Brawl is one that should work, but gets a smidge stuck, while Swindle shouldn't, but styles on everyone else. Moving to the next pack, Blastoff is decent, looks-wise at least. He's not quite as stylish as the members that came before, but he fits in with the others reasonably well. The torso works well enough with some nice layering and paint effects on show. It's almost like he's wearing overalls, making him the fruity house husband to Onslaught's working-class breadwinner vibe. This is canon, you can't argue this. It does feel a little unfocused though, partially because some of the paint is a little sloppy, but also partly because he doesn't have anything that's grounded. Maybe putting more of an emphasis on the angular or boxy natures like Brawl or Swindle did respectively, but as it stands, it's this weird middle ground, not helped by the nothing head sculpt. It's not bad, but it just doesn't elicit any emotional response from me. It's just sort of there, ill-defined and blank. I do like how the tops of the shuttles become shoulder armor. It's a really nice use of kibble, but then the forearms don't really do anything, looking more like sand scoops. I realize a lot of this comes down to recreating the G1 Blastoff transformation down to the letter, but perhaps that was better left in the past. The legs are fine, I guess. There's hints of some really cool cuboid layering effects, but they just get drowned out by the wing kibble on the side. Still, given the age of this figure, I'm willing to cut it some slack. Articulation is pretty similar to Brawl, save for the shoulder armor and an added ab crunch. Below the waist swivel. I've never been a fan of this. When you add it below the waist swivel, it basically serves the same function as a hip joint. It's always been a pet peeve of mine, though I do get why they didn't engineer one into the torso. He has to extend for the combine mode, so I do get it. That does bring up an interesting question though. Why not just use the combiner joint as an extra swivel and ab crunch? Well, this is where my main flaw with this figure comes about, and where Blastoff cements himself as the absolute worst of this set. I'm just gonna gently extend this and show you. You see that? Those are stress marks, right on the plastic. Those didn't happen over time, those are present right out of the box. And it's not just an icky thing with the plastic. These things have a tendency to snap if too much pressure is applied. This is unacceptable, and unfortunately in this release system, there's no way around it. For whatever reason, Iron Factory never reissues their figures. Even when they advertise things as first run only, they just never make a second run. So the whole thing is moot anyway. Blastoff and his pack-in-made Vortex, and even the rest of the Combaticons have never been re-released. So far as legitimate Iron Factory Bruticus go, Blastoff is always going to have the potential breakage issues. Now, to be fair, other releases seem to have corrected it. It's far more common to come across the Pocket Toys knockoff of this set, and as far as I can gather, this isn't an issue on this version. Don't quote me on that, as I've never had the chance to mess with one myself. I just don't hear any complaints about it in the bootleg circles. Whereas in the Iron Factory groups, this was all anyone was talking about back in the day. It's a similar thing with the Ball Donation redeco that came later. Nobody seems to be complaining, so no news is potentially good news. But unfortunately, for the original release, you're stuck with it, and it really sucks. This thing goes from a passable robot to potentially a ticking time bomb, and much like other instances, it really hampers my enjoyment. Beyond that, the weapons are fine, I guess. The guns that hold the combined mode together aren't anything to write home about, and the standalone gun would be cool if it actually locked into place. I get that it has to merge with the other weapons, but none of them had any issues like this. Bit of a shame. At least it stores on the back, helping to cover up that really weird transparent purple section. It's not bad, just odd. Blastoff had the potential to be a solid member. He doesn't particularly go above and beyond, save for some kinda cool G1 conversion throwbacks and vehicle mode stylings, but nothing visually or engineering wise is particularly heinous. It's just that damn waist section that ruins the whole thing. When a figure breaks or has the potential to break, I'm afraid I just can't cut it any slack. If you plan on seeking other avenues for hunting this figure down, maybe you'll have better luck. But as far as the original figure that stands before me, even though I've been pretty safe with mine, I still can't rate it very highly. His Pac-Mate, on the other hand, he's a bit weird. There's some really cool bits on him, but they're like all in the wrong places. Head sculpt is great, all angular and mean. The red could be a bit stronger. In fact, I think the eye paint on both members within this pack could be better overall, but it still communicates the character design quite well, at least way better than the banality of Magic Square with its missing visor. But then it sits atop this nothing chest that just sorta exists, I guess? Much like Blastoff, there's really not a lot to it in terms of salient features. It just sorta fits in there, and I do get the necessity to have the combiner joint in there, but there had to be a better way to do this. The arms are fine, but then you realize he has articulated shoulder pieces on the back. Why are they here? Why aren't they in full view like on Blastoff? And the legs? Okay, these are awesome, with so many angled panel pieces and crazy reuse of the window details. It's a shame it required parts for me to get here, but the end result is pretty neat. I just have to wonder why the effort was put in here of all places, when the rest of it could really use that same effort. And the weirdest part is, this was my favorite of the set back when I first reviewed it 6 years ago. Like, what? What did I see here? Was it the fact that you can use the combiner joint as an ab crunch? I guess Blastoff can't really accomplish that with all of his construction issues. And back then, ab crunches on Legends figures weren't particularly common. In fact, ab crunches on figures in general weren't as common back in 2018 overall. At least the accessories work okay. For as much as a cop-out as the windshield gun is, kinda works. At least a smidge better than the two worst offenders on the channel in the past. You do have to watch out for those wrist rockets though, because these two are sexy. They really bring the design to life, at least as much as weapons feasibly can on a somewhat mediocre base. I really like how they're sorta smaller versions of what Megatron had in Transformers 1, although this predates that design by a significant amount. So I guess the closest thing would be Fall of Cybertron Shockwave. This is not Fall of Cybertron Shockwave, but it is a mold mate, so you get the idea. In the end, Vortex is a weird one. In fact, this whole pack is a weird one. It's so close to being good, but it just seems to fall flat. Maybe it's because they're dealing with some really weird designs, essentially triple changes no less. Like, the legs remain in vehicle mode, and the torso doesn't nearly go through as much conversion, basically just extending. It feels like they up a wee bit in trying to juggle too much. But for Vortex specifically, he's not bad, he's just not that great either. The pack ends up being a smidge undercooked. There's elements I like, and overall I'd say it's better than the vehicle modes, but you can tell this was a first combiner attempt. It's plain to see, undeniable even, just like the fact Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Can you tell this video was supposed to release in December? Fortunately, the final member to close out the team is absolutely gorgeous. Well, sort of the final member if you don't count accessories and supposed first run bonuses. Either way, this is one lush robot. The first thing you'll notice right off the bat is the colors. From head to toe, Onslaught looks absolutely gorgeous. The army green and light turquoise combo is a true sight to behold. See, I can love this color when it's not on a complete and utter piece of shit. Also, am I the only one who thinks this is what Magic Square should have used? Just me? Okay. It's also balanced very well, centering itself around the torso but still allowing the blue to peek through right down the middle. Speaking of, the toy style torso isn't bad. I feel it could probably use a bit more paint, but you don't tend to notice when everything around looks so lush. Maybe I'm biased though, this is my preferred Onslaught torso design. The detailing of the arms is also pretty good. I think the silver shoulders really tie it together, though it's obvious they rely on the addition of con symbols as they look pretty plain without. Nice that they got the extra gunmetal on the wrist though, really ties everything together. Will say I kinda wish the shoulder kibble properly fit together. It's always bugged me how it slightly angles outwards. Oh well, it's pretty ignorable. The lower legs sorta do the same thing as Swindle with big cubes of chunk. They end up looking like military boots and I think that works really well. It gives them a nice low center of gravity, also like Swindle, and it plays well with the posing. It's pretty in line with what we've experienced before, albeit with ratcheted hips to account for the combined modes. It's pretty neat that they're able to make them loose enough to work well on Onslaught alone, but tight enough that they function properly when combined. Overall, it's a simple fella, but a really lovely one nonetheless. Really, the deco carries this. I don't think I'd be this into it if it were a little duller, or if the colors were the same as the Magic Square outing, inaccurate or no. In the colors respect, it blows said Magic Square out of the water. Not overall, and especially not in engineering and posing, but I do think he looks better visually. The only part I feel falls flat in comparison is the head sculpt. It's not bad, but it's just really rounded compared to how he's usually portrayed. I get that's purposeful stylization, but it feels at odds with the rest of the boxiness. That's the one visual aspect I feel Magic Square has over this. Of course, again, there's no contest in hardware, but other than that, there's really not a lot to complain about. I mean, I prefer if the guns at the top weren't so wibbly. They flop around and it feels like they want to rotate over the sides, but they're never quite able to. Being unfortunate, but like, yeah, it's fine. His other accessory, being the rifle, also works really well. Despite not having an extra peg, it can actually be held in both hands pretty cohesively. Brawl's probably crying in the corner somewhere thanks to this. I really like the extra energon lines on show. They're quite lovely, and I wish some of the other guns had it too. Just like I wish people would acknowledge Die Hard is a Christmas movie. All in all, pretty good package. He's a simple figure overall, but he uses that to his effect and delivers a damn fine Onslaught. Back in the day, this would have begged the question, is he worth the price? We hadn't really been exposed to figures like Menasor, or Menasor as a Concord, or Menasor's Revenge of the Fallen Overload. These are fine, and the same pretty much applies to this fella here. Leader price for a big chunky Legends figure with a bunch of accessories? That's pretty fair to me. And hey, they do actually have their own functionality, combining into a bust on the side. I actually forgot about this in the original video, but after finally giving it a proper look, yeah, nah, this is kinda dumb. It's cool that this exists, but it's really flimsy. The joints holding everything together aren't solid at all, especially the pelvis piece, which just sits there. And it's a shame that this was the extent of the functionality with Swindle's roll bar accessory. It would have been way better if it prioritized something for the standalone robot mode. But well, it's something you can absolutely ignore if you want. I mean, I did for over 6 years. I realize a bunch of people are going to watch this and scream in agony, claiming it's an insult to combiner engineering and everything should be all inbuilt. But we've had 2 examples on the channel that prove this is not the case. As well as, if you go back far enough, one that shows the compromise is required to do it all inbuilt. I feel like I should cover some of the old CW stuff someday, just to touch base on the issues that were present at the time. Either way though, the concept is fine, just not the execution. Really wish more combiners would engage in G1 style base modes. It's just so much better. Of course, there's one more quick thing to touch on. One more included accessory. Okay, less of an accessory, more an included extra figure. As alluded to earlier, the first one of this set packed in a bonus figure, Combiner Hunter RC. I'm not going to bog you down again with how this works, as I've already covered her a couple of days ago, and earlier in this very review. She's a good pack-in, a nice little cheap bonus that helps provide value to early adopters of this set. But the thing is, as mentioned earlier, they never actually made a second run of Bruticus. They did Balder Nation years later, but Iron Factory follows the tradition of never reissuing anything ever. This means for a complete set, RC will need to be included. And coincidentally, this is the one element aftermarket sales often miss, more so than even the weapons. I'm not going to pretend that this is an absolute must-have for grabbing Bruticus, but it is something to note if you want the whole experience. Of course, pretty sure the KO doesn't have it, so for those hoping to save some cash, it won't apply anyway. Regardless, in robot mode, this is a really nice set. There's definitely elements I feel they could have improved, and maybe starting over on the arm buddies would have been a good idea, but seeing them all lined up does things. things. They've all got that 2000s future vibe to them, like something out of old Toonami, or Code Lyoko, or Benjamin Tenjamin. Seeing them all together as a team works, arguably far more effectively than the Magic Square sets. So perhaps that's part of a personal preference towards the mechanical detail. Still, it's a massive step above the vehicle modes, and even if that shows issues with their priorities and then present growing pains, I do have to commend them for that. For all their faults, this really works, and smooths out a lot of the rough edges. Except for the build quality issues on Blastoff. I'm sorry, but that's still not acceptable. F off, please. You know, honestly, I miss combiners like this. A lot of combiners we combine today, both official and unofficial, are just a lot more complex than these are. I'm not saying that there aren't benefits to having complex combiners, because often they are far sturdier. If you know what you're doing, you can really do crazy things with them. But you know, part of me kind of misses how simple all of these were. I guess that's kind of why I've been having a lot of fun with the recent Siang Culture train bots. Only the first two are out, and the rest of the set could be complete another dog shit, but these two have been quite fun, in a very similar way to these. It's a nice throwback, and it would be nice to get some simple combiners like these in the future, instead of ones that you have to build up in a really complex way. But yeah, you can basically see Swindle and Brawl remain in vehicle mode, and the rest remain in robot mode, just how it really functions. Brawl is a bit annoying with the turret, where you have to rotate it around on its double hinge to the kneecap. It's kind of frustrating and often comes off, but you basically just get it up to the top there, it moves from there to there. But once it's in place, it's fine. Very much prefer the way Magic Square did it, where it was basically upside down. As for the combiner kibble, it'll of course be assembled. Interestingly, the wheels will actually be facing inwards, so you take the one from the outside, but you bring the wheels inwards like that. Then you bring it up, and they actually have dedicated slots, so each foot works in a very specific way. For this, you basically plug it in there, and then this plugs into the waist. And yeah, you got that head facing there, but it's fine. Swindle will function very much similarly, only there's not really much transformation you'll need to do with him. Everything just pegs in properly, though you will need to bring up this bonnet section to bring that in there. Onslaught basically turns into a cube with legs, but I think it works really well. We'll get the arms done first, just so that they're out of the way. You want to bring in the shoulder pieces so they clip in now. Bring in the forearms like so into their vehicle mode configurations. Then you rotate them downwards and use the hinges on the ball joints to peg them into the sides, like so and like so. Don't need to actually worry about the head, it just kind of sits there. Anyway, then you bring out the hips, ratchet in these sections, like so. You can bring up these panels as well, because we won't really be using them. These heel spurs now go all the way up so that we've got a bit more clearance for the knees. The feet rotate inwards, and you bring out the tabs for the combined mode. And let's make use of those tabs. They slot in forwards like there, and then the leg rotates into place and you can bring that there. Same with Brawl, plugs in there and rotates forwards. Nice and easy. You can then start kibbling him up. These sections rotate forwards to become the hip skirts, then you bring that in, and you bring that down and it clips into place. And you can probably guess exactly where it's going to plug in. The sort of chassis for the vehicle needs to open up. You bring these sections up like so, then you fold down the wheels at the top. They are a bit underdone, and I wish they could have been fixed a bit better, but whatever. You also want to make sure you come under and get the combined mode hinges out. Actually, the combined mode tabs, I should say. They're the hinges for the shoulders, but the tabs for combining. Then around the back, you've got two tabs here and two slots here, and everything should fit together like so. Eventually it just gets in there. I don't know why I was having clearance issues for a second there. Everything should line up properly. And then the torso works basically the way you would. Interestingly, this entire section here is hollow, but it doesn't really feel like it. But yeah, what you want to do is peg that over the top and bring out the wings like so. Bring down the head like so. If you haven't already, get the antennae into place, and the horn also folds up like so, although it does tend to fall down pretty easily. Annoying, but it's fine. The backpack, I actually like to have these facing forward with the clear part, so that it gives a bit more definition. They do have hinges there, and they do function, so that all pegs into there. And then there's not much you can particularly do with this. It sort of sits on the back for storage, but it doesn't accomplish much, unfortunately. It is what it is. Now, as I said, you have to be very careful with Blastoff, given his breakage issues. The top half transforms basically the way you'd expect, just like the G1 toy. Cool in concept, not so much in execution. But it's basically just going the other way of what I showed you before. And then you gently have to get this out so it doesn't damage the waist section there. And out we go. But it's not actually that solid there, because as I was saying earlier, you need to take these guns and use that for them. They peg together like so, come down like that, and then they slot into the waist section like that, covering up the torso. If you lose those, you've basically got an incomplete combined mode, so don't lose those. Anywho, you then rotate everything into place, bring these back into their vehicle mode configuration. Geez, they are really tight. Why are these really tight, but the actual knees are quite loose? That's a bit of warped priorities there, Lamau. But eventually it all comes together and it all clips into place, and the kibble just stays on the side. These bits actually rotate around backwards into their vehicle mode configurations, but leave them back back like that, because first we're gonna have to deal with the fists. The fists actually come out of the cavities like so. They're dedicated, but they've got nice storage in these rocket pods. And Blast-Off's has the 2 pegs there that will sit there. And then these will actually line up with the rest of the fist to create some cool wrist detail. Very nice. Anywho, after everything is rotated into place, combining could not be simpler. Pegs in and rotates down. I just miss combiners that were this simple to combine, where it could just plug together super easily. I guess Menasor did that, but he also had a really complex trailer conversion. But I mean, not everyone can be Menasor, you know? Vortex is sort of similar. You basically get the back section into how you would, and then you get the arms ready to convert the way they would. But as mentioned in robot mode, they have their own dedicated slots to tab into for combine mode. Sort of like Onslaught, actually. And then, of course, you can be a lot rougher with this combiner joint here. It's a lot sturdier, no issues of damaging the waist. And then these sort of transform back, but not all the way. You want to leave these open just for now, because once you get it into place, the parts forming piece comes into play. You want to remove the gun from there, out you get, and then you'll notice that the handle actually has grooves in it. That is because it will sit right here at the top, and you sandwich it in there, and it will remain slightly above the rest of the cockpit. I think this could have and should have been fully engineered into the design itself, but it's still okay. Then, of course, you need to make sure these are closed up, and the fist comes in over the bottom. This is probably the weakest connection of the bunch. It does come off fairly easily, but I mean, one issue in an entire combine mode, yeah, you're doing alright. At least it works okay. And there we go. And same deal where you peg it in and rotate it down, but we're not quite done yet, because aside from getting this back into place like so, I just left it off to make the transformation a bit easier. We also have the combined weapon mode, which, oh my god, this is a really cool concept, and I wish more combiners would do this. I get that it takes a lot out of the budget, but third party could really do any of these. Come on, have some more creativity. Fold down the handle, fold in this section, and lock it in place with that. You take Blast-Off's gun, rotate up, rotate in the handle, turn it upside down, and that'll peg in there, with then this bit folding in on the bottom. Brawl's bazooka folds in with this tab rotating backwards. It can then comfortably sit on the rest of it like so. Oop, there we go. You then lock the whole thing in place with Brawl's Uzis. You've got a slot there and a tab there, and they peg into the sides like so. Come on, get it on. There we go. And of course, the other side is obviously flipped, so that just pegs in there. Nice and solidly. Vortex's scope that we removed earlier goes on the top, and Vortex's other guns go on the side like so, and we are done. Nice and solid. Like, that doesn't even look like a combined gun. That just looks like a gun. Probably the best combined gun I have ever seen. Sometimes I do find myself forgetting how to do it, because it is a little bit complex, but it is still a fantastic feature, and I wish other companies would do it. Only downside is there's not really a good place for the remaining rocket pod holders. They just sort of sit on the butt plate like that. It's a thing you can do, but it's not the best. That's like the one downside of the combined mode. But no, everything else works really well. If it weren't for the issues with Blast-Off, I'd be doing this conversion way more often, because everything is really simple and really satisfying. Again, I wish more combinations these days would use this system, because although there's wonderful things you can find with the skeletal system, and I still think the skeletal system is just better overall, there is a certain charm to combinations like this, and I do miss them. This combined mode, hot damn, this is something else. Don't get me wrong, it's got its issues, and it's far from the best Legends combiner in my collection, but beholding this in person is something beyond words. When I first combined this, I was hit with a wave of awe and amazement. One that I just hadn't felt with Hulky. I think what really brings it to life is the sheer amount of mechanical detail. I know the Toon style is a lot more popular these days with everything flat as a pancake, but there's just something special about having a figure like this sculpted from head to toe. There are just so many panel lines on this thing. He feels built as opposed to just being formed from putty. I realize this might be personal preference yet again, but f me sideways. This is just something else. It's a shame we just don't get combiners like this anymore, save for the other Iron Factory combiners and things that are obviously Iron Factory combiners even if they say they aren't. And Kang Toy's Predaking, I guess. The metallic torso is absolutely gorgeous. It's the perfect intersection of shiny and matte, making all the details super crisp. I really wish more toy-styled Bruticus would go this route. It was always the intent of the G1 toy with its swirly silver plastic, and some Onslaughts actually came with die-cast combiner torsos. I'm not making this up, check Fred's workshop, it'll prove I'm right. I also love the gunmetal in clear purple peeking through. Really helps bring it to life. In fact, the clear purple is the star of the torso, though I'm not so sure about the codpiece windshield. Seems a bit weird. I thought you were supposed to look at not have look at you. That was supposed to be a joke. I'm not that kind of toy review channel, idiots. Couldn't even use my actual business email. Unprofessional shit. The arms are also proportioned very well, using the blocky mass to beef him the f up. It's It's less flowing and more he is a man made of bricks. Not that he is a brick, because he poses quite well. I really like the way the wrist pieces wrap around the existing kibble. They so easily could have Combiner Wars'd it and called it a day, but this feels so much more cohesive. It would actually lay a lot of the groundwork for the Magic Square version later down the line, so pretty cool. The included fingers are also fantastic, nice and chunky, all rectangular yet still very posable. This is how you do fingers, not the new sausage fest on Magic Square. Love the dorsum detailing, like a piece of an old circuit board ripped off to create knuckle tattoos. The back of the hand is a really underrated part of Transformers design to put extra detail, and I vibe with this immensely. Admittedly, I was a little concerned about these going in back in the day, as the standard for articulated fingers was pretty much just Keith's Fantasy Club stuff. Happy to report, however, that these are durable as f*** as well as posable as f***. Not quite licking, but definitely finger good. I'm also happy to report that the back cleans up immensely well. Everything remains super solidly in place, nothing seems wibbly. Given how many goddamn Legends combiners get their backs blown out, the fact Iron Factory was able to get this right the first time round, it shouldn't be commendable, but it is. Now, unfortunately, the standalone Onslaught cannons don't really have a lot to do, just sort of dangling off the back. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal, as you can just leave it to the side, but given how well the rest of the integration works, it does seem to fall a bit short, albeit not as much as the roll cage. The other side rocket pods on the butt plate also cause their own issues, locking up the waist swivel a smidge. You still get a reasonable amount of range, but it can't compete with fully unhampered movement with them taken off. Again though, like, just take them off. No biggie. The back section still does incredibly well, and it's leagues ahead of the competition. I mean, we got falls apart, wobbles around in stock configuration, or has loose wheels with the upgrade kits, untabs due to poorly designed ab crunches, no, or coming apart at the waist. Really, the only third-party Legends combiners I've come across that have managed to solidly lock everything in place just so happen to all be from Iron Factory. Maybe the other company should look to them for guidance. Clearly they're doing something right. Of course, he's not without fault. There's plenty of elements on this figure that try to be amazing, but unfortunately due to either inexperience or poor build quality, fall a little short. The head sculpt is amazing, communicating the ferocity of the design very well. It's a little sunken in and they've kind of given up on the purple light piping, but it's still ferocious as shit. I love how far up the crest in the middle goes. It's a cool aesthetic we don't get to see a lot on many versions these days, with the bog standard G1 crest taking center stage instead. It's pretty cool, but the antenna and crest also refuse to stay in place. Whenever you go to move it, and sometimes even standing on a shelf, they depress really easily. I mean, it's fine I guess, but some locking tabs or better tolerances would have been greatly appreciated. Or maybe this is just quality control, I don't know. I do know that blast-offs issues affect all copies though, so there's that. Don't need to go into more detail on that front. I also know a messy forearm when I see one. I get the intent of having the windshield here, but it just does not work as a finished product. Combined with how messy the rotor blades end up on Vortex's shoulder, I stand by the opinion that this guy should have been redesigned from the ground up. On the shoulders, the wheel assemblies just bug me. It's the only part of the design that flat out looks unfinished. I should be annoyed with how hollow everything else is, but honestly I don't notice it that much. At least not as much as those damn wheels. I also don't like the leg proportions. The short thighs are fine given the overall bulky aesthetic, but these shins are just way too wide. Honestly, given some of the issues with the individual bots, the vehicles didn't need to be this wide. They could have fixed a lot of visual problems by slimming these down. It's almost like they made a stylistic choice at the start, but then refused to tweak as they went along. The articulation is alright, but there's definitely some areas where it could have been improved. The shoulders have trouble getting out of the way, though that's emblematic of the design. And the hips often get stuck on the waist assembly, despite having dedicated hip skirts. It's definitely got some of that early combiner jank in its posing. That cannot be denied. But here's the thing. One thing that has to be taken into account is that this was essentially the second third-party Legends combiner ever produced. They were pretty much going in blind, trying to figure out how to make things work while still keeping the individual bots functional. They hadn't even figured out how to use dedicated skeletons yet. So like, it's okay. It's still reasonably articulated for 2018, and it sure as hell puts Hulky in his place. For as much as I've come to love that since release, it really goes to show that some of the articulation just wasn't acceptable. One interesting thing to note is that the weight on this guy is done quite well. They've actually kept most of the chest hollow, so that the majority of the mass is shifted to the legs. This makes some of the more daring poses a lot easier, especially as he has no dedicated skeleton to compensate. For all his flaws, posing accomplishes pretty much everything he could feasibly do in universe. I don't think you'd see combiners doing the superhero landing in lore. As long as you don't do something that drastic, you'll be fine. Accessory-wise, he's basically got two guns, a mini non-transforming shockwave and the combined form of the robot mode pew-pews. Now for the former, if memory serves, this was included initially because of concerns with the weight on the dedicated shockwave. I'm not sure if it was due to fan complaints or designer worries, but it was included so that Bruticus could pose without being bogged down by the ridiculous size. And it does work very well for that purpose. It's nothing crazy, but it conveys the design of the full-sized version to a reasonable extent. It's lovely seeing the gorgeous gorgeous choice of purple back. And although the details aren't one-to-one, the general shape is roughly the same. It is better proportioned for Bruticus to hold, so for photography it might be your preferred option. However, if you do have Shockwave, it turns out the weight issues were kinda exaggerated. Yeah, you can still get some decent poses out of this thing. Not as seamless as the dedicated gun, as it does make the extra elbow hinge impossible to use, but this still works. Only problem is it's ridiculously oversized. But to those dead set on giving it a shot, that probably won't be an issue. Like, there's a novelty to having a Shockwave that works with combiners. If you're like me and somehow have both, each release offers something different. So, pick your poison. Only thing is, I'm not sure if the knockoffs are compatible, as they're produced by different companies, and the Shockwave may or may not be oversized. I'm not sure. If anyone in the comments wants to give it a shot, let me know. As for the other accessory, this barely looks like a combined gun. It just looks like a rifle, and a pretty good one at that. This isn't the first time something like this was attempted. I'm pretty sure Warbatron gave it a shot beforehand, but it's probably the best I've seen on a Bruticus. Sure, there are a few seams in the middle, but plenty of guns have waffling as is, so it's not that heinous. Given how good this looks, it seems obvious to me that this is why the standalone guns had so many issues. It's nearly certain that they started with this and worked their way backwards, and it's worked pretty well as a result. Part of me does wish they came with a melee weapon, as I've always found they made more sense for something this big, but I get it really isn't accurate to any version of the character, so I'll take the awesomeness that is the combined gun mode. And hey, way better than whatever Magic Square was doing. Seriously, this is about as much of a gun as Die Hard isn't a Christmas movie. Oh, and I guess Combiner Hunter RC counts as an accessory too. Works great for photography, I suppose, but figure-wise, she's just okay. Again, really no point going over her in detail, as I kinda already have. Weird they never made a Chromio to finish the trio though. It's like the one design I feel they're missing. Don't think we're ever gonna get one, sadly, as they've moved on to very different things. Grading this set is difficult because there is a lot of good, but also a lot of jank. There's fantastic elements, and unacceptable elements, and things they could have done better, and parts that just make you scratch your head. At the time, I loved this thing to absolute bits, partly because it showed DX9 how it was done, but also partly because it did everything I wanted a Bruticus to do. These days, I expect a bit more, but it surpassed all my expectations 6 years ago. However, it's not 6 years ago anymore, and this figure is starting to show its age. A lot of that does boil down to me growing as a reviewer, expanding my critique palette and having less patience for severe build quality issues. But also, we just have better combiners on the market these days. Like, for all its flaws, Magic Square is better. Not because they build on what this did, but simply because the industry has moved forward as a whole. However, even so, I think this still has a place in many people's collections. For one thing, it's a historical piece showing how companies improved and one-upped each other. And for another, it's really good. The aesthetic is to die for, even with some proportional issues. The engineering is a lot simpler than what many companies go for these days, even Iron Factory themselves. So outside of potential breakage issues, it encourages you to play with it. And even those breakage issues concerns might not be valid given War Giant was Hulkified, with dirt cheap bootlegs flooding the market. Not only is there a high chance the knockoff won't snap to pieces, but it's so dirt cheap that even if it does, you're not particularly losing much. So if you're dead set on getting this, there's really nothing I feel I need to say to stop you. Yes, it has its issues, but even to this day, it's a remarkable third-party Legends piece. Sometimes it's just fun to look back, and this time, the Abyss didn't look back at me. Instead, it smiled and waved. And I took a nice trip down memory lane. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on third-party Legends combiners below. Does this piece really show its age, or does it stand above everything releasing around it? Does this style of combiner hit you just right, or do you prefer the skeletal system? Judging by the comments on the upcoming Age of Prime Soups and Devi, I don't think my audience does, even if I myself think it's incredibly beneficial. But enough combiner talk, this has been a wild road, and I thank you for joining me. This concludes the 5th sort of annual Legendary Marathon. I'm sorry I couldn't get it done entirely in December, but at least I was able to make these behemoth videos properly and catalog some unique third-party history. And with that, we're done. Yeah, context and everything, till next time and all that fuckery. I'm finished! This has been a huge marathon, and I'm pooped as shit, so all there is to say is, bye!